Section 21 of A Sentimental Journey Through France and Italy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. A Sentimental Journey Through France and Italy by Laurence Sterne. Section 21. The Fragment, Paris. Now, as the notary's wife disputed the point with the notary with too much heat, "I wish," said the notary, throwing down the parchment, "that there was another notary here, only to set down and attest all this." "And what would you do then, monsieur?" said she, rising hastily up. The notary's wife was a little fume of a woman, and the notary thought it well to avoid a hurricane by a mild reply. "I would go," answered he, "to bed." "You may go to the devil," answered the notary's wife. Now, there happening to be but one bed in the house, the other two rooms being unfurnished, as is the custom at Paris, and the notary not caring to lie in the same bed with a woman who had but that moment sent him pell-mell to the devil, went forth with his hat and cane and short cloak, the night being very windy, and walked out, ill at ease, towards the Pont Neuf. Of all the bridges which ever were built, the whole world who have passed over the Pont Neuf must own that it is the noblest, the finest, the grandest, the lightest, the longest, the broadest, that ever conjoined land and land together upon the face of the terraqueous globe. By this it seems as if the author of the fragment had not been a Frenchman. The worst fault which divines and doctors of the Sorbonne can allege against it is, that if there is but a capful of wind in or about Paris, 'tis more blasphemously sacre Dieu'd there than in any other aperture of the whole city. And with reason good and cogent, messieurs, for it comes against you without crying Garde l'eau, and with such unpremeditable puffs, that of the few who cross it with their hats on, not 1 in 50 but hazards 2 livres and a half, which is its full worth. The poor notary, just as he was passing by the sentry, instinctively clapped his cane to the side of it, but in raising it up, the point of his cane catching hold of the loop of the sentinel's hat, hoisted it over the spikes of the balustrade clear into the Seine. "'Tis an ill wind," said a boatman who catched it, "which blows nobody any good." The sentry, being a Gascon, incontinently twirled up his whiskers and levelled his arquebus. Arquebuses in those days went off with matches, and an old woman's paper lantern at the end of the bridge happening to be blown out, she had borrowed the sentry's match to light it. It gave a moment's time for the Gascon's blood to run cool, and turn the accident better to his advantage. "'Tis an ill wind," said he, catching off the notary's castor, fur hat, and legitimating the capture with the boatman's adage. The poor notary crossed the bridge, and passing along the Rue de Dauphine into the faubourgs of Saint Germain, lamented himself as he walked along in this manner. Luckless man that I am, said the notary, to be the sport of hurricanes all my days, to be born to have the storm of ill language levelled against me and my profession wherever I go, to be forced into marriage by the thunder of the church to a tempest of a woman, to be driven forth out of my house by domestic winds, and despoiled of my castor by pontific ones, to be here bareheaded in a windy night at the mercy of the ebbs and flows of accidents. Where am I to lay my head? Miserable man! What wind in the 32 points of the whole compass can blow unto thee, as it does to the rest of thy fellow creatures, good? As the notary was passing on by a dark passage, complaining in this sort, a voice called out to a girl to bid her run for the next notary. Now the notary being the next, and availing himself of his situation, walked up the passage to the door, and passing through an old sort of a saloon, was ushered into a large chamber, dismantled of everything but a long military pike, a breastplate, a rusty old sword and bandolier, hung up equidistant in 4 different places along the wall. An old personage, who had heretofore been a gentleman, and, unless decay of fortune taints the blood along with it, was a gentleman at that time, lay supporting his head upon his hand in his bed. A little table with a taper burning was set close beside it, and close by the table was placed a chair. The notary sat him down in it, and pulling out his inkhorn and a sheet or 2 of paper which he had in his pocket, he placed them before him, and dipping his pen in his ink, and leaning his breast over the table, he disposed everything to make the gentleman's last will and testament. Alas, monsieur le notaire, said the gentleman, raising himself up a little, I have nothing to bequeath, which will pay the expense of bequeathing, except the history of myself, which I could not die in peace unless I left it as a legacy to the world. The profits arising out of it I bequeath to you for the pains of taking it from me. It is a story so uncommon, it must be read by all mankind. It will make the fortunes of your house. The notary dipped his pen into his inkhorn. Almighty director of every event in my life, said the old gentleman, looking up earnestly, and raising his hands towards heaven, thou whose hand has led me on through such a labyrinth of strange passages down into this scene of desolation, assist the decaying memory of an old, infirm, and broken-hearted man. Direct my tongue by the spirit of thy eternal truth, that this stranger may set down naught but what is written in that book, from whose records, said he, clasping his hands together, I am to be condemned or acquitted. The notary held up the point of his pen betwixt the taper and his eye. It is a story, monsieur le notaire, said the gentleman, which will rouse up every affection in nature. It will kill the humane, and touch the heart of cruelty herself with pity. The notary was inflamed with a desire to begin, and put his pen a third time into his inkhorn; and the old gentleman, turning a little more towards the notary, began to dictate his story in these words: "And where is the rest of it, La Fleur?" said I, as he just then entered the room. The Fragment and the Bouquet. Paris. When La Fleur came up close to the table, and was made to comprehend what I wanted, he told me there were only 2 other sheets of it, which he had wrapped round the stalks of a bouquet to keep it together, which he had presented to the demoiselle upon the boulevards. Then prithee, La Fleur, said I, step back to her to the Count de B.'s hotel, and see if thou canst get it. There is no doubt of it, said La Fleur, and away he flew. In a very little time, the poor fellow came back quite out of breath, with deeper marks of disappointment in his looks than could arise from the simple irreparability of the fragment. Juste ciel! In less than 2 minutes that the poor fellow had taken his last tender farewell of her, his faithless mistress had given his gage d'amour to one of the Count's footmen, the footman to a young sempstress, and the sempstress to a fiddler, with my fragment at the end of it. Our misfortunes were involved together. I gave a sigh, and La Fleur echoed it back again to my ear. Ah! How perfidious! cried La Fleur. How unlucky! said I. I should not have been mortified, monsieur, quoth La Fleur, if she had lost it. Nor I, La Fleur, said I, had I found it. Whether I did or no will be seen hereafter. End of Section 21. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.